welcome back to Prime Morning with me, Razak Basba. And of course, I've got Paa Kwesi Schandorf in studios, the Director of Communication of the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources. Of course, biggest news having to do with the Damang Mine. AMP have been granted the lease now. A statement from the ministry yesterday upheld the recommendation by the tender committee. And he's here to help us appreciate what all of that is about. Schandorf, how are you doing?
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Yeah, very good.
You're looking good.
Thank you.
Yeah, looking good. It's so much Damang Mine all over you, right?
No, not at all.
Damang Mine is all over you.
Not at all.
Well, lands and natural resources all over you. It's great. Good to see you. But let's talk about the Damang Mine first of all. So there was a tender committee that received bids, if you want to call it,
Absolutely.
from 4 companies.
Right.
And then they sieved the 4 companies, and there were 2 left. And of the 2, they checked their technical expertise, if you want to describe it, and finally settled on E&P, right?
Right.
Help us appreciate a bit more what this tender committee set out to do.
Right. First of all, let me, by way of courtesy, extend a very good morning to yourself and to the rest of our audience who are connected across the globe, and welcome them to this conversation, if I may. So, yes, like you rightly indicated, the committee was established for that purpose. But before we talk about the operational parameters of the committee and what they were expected to deliver, it's important to, first of all, put on record that the mine in question had become ripe for a transfer because the operators, Abosu Goldfield, had extended, or if like had exhausted, rather I should say, had exhausted their lease period. And indeed, on the 18th of April of this month, a transfer under the circumstances would have been imminent anyway. So it was necessary for that kind of arrangement to have been put in place so that, first of all, jobs are secured and then the operation of the mine is not truncated. Because if at the 18th of April there is no new leaseholder, definitely that would cause some kind of disruption whatsoever. And so by way of a trajectory, on the 19th of March last month, the Minerals Commission drew the attention of the sector minister to the fact that there was a lacking lacuna in the sense that the tenure of the lease was going to expire. Therefore, something had to be done about it. Also, based on that recommendation, the minister subsequently directed that a competitive tender bid be opened and then a successful applicants be selected accordingly to take over the operationalization of the mine. And that is what led to the constitution of the tender committee in the very first place. Questions have been asked about the membership of the committee. Indeed, there are lots of widespread public allegations about the entirety of the whole bid.
We know the board chairman of the Forest Commission is there. We know the CEO of the, is it the EPA?
No, it's not the Forestry Commission board chair, rather. That's the executive director of the Ghana Geological Survey Authority. Okay. So by the operation of law, the committee is constituted by 5 individuals, 3 of them from the Minerals Commission, 2 of them from the Minerals Commission. One acts as chairman, the other secretary of the committee. Then there was representation from the EPA as well as the Ghana Geological Survey Authority. So for the EPA, of course, the chief executive officer was the one who was represented. That is the Professor Nanama Kluche Brown. And then from the GGSA, Dr. Akaba was present in that particular respect, in addition to the 3 other members of the Minerals Commission. So 3 MINCOM members, then GGSA and EPA, making a total of 5. Now, there were 2 other individuals that were co-opted onto the committee from the ministry, who, of course, had no voting rights in that particular respect. So that basically was the lineup for the constitution of the committee. Now, their mandate was very clear and simple. First of all, to review the tenders that were going to come in. Beyond the review, then determine the successful tenderer and, of course, make recommendations back to the Minerals Commission for the process of the lease transfer, so to speak. And that is what they dutifully discharged and reported to the ministry in that particular respect. Now, let's come to the substantive question. Yes, there were 4 firms or outfits who bidded, and for the records, we would want to mention their names: Vortex Resources Mining Group, Engineers and Planners, of course, Heath Goldfields, and then Maripoma Mining Services Limited. The truth of the matter is that Maripoma and Vortex did not make it to the, if in football terms, I mean, just because you do sports, we could say that they did not even make it to the, perhaps the semi-finals of the, or maybe the quarterfinals of the whole competition. Because for starters, the ground rules were very clear and set that any interested bidder must first of all be able to satisfy the mandatory requirements. All right, now, these were the terms of the mandatory requirements. You needed to prove that your outfit was a fully owned Ghanaian enterprise. You also needed to supply, by way of documentation, a valid tax clearance certificate, a valid SNIT clearance certificate, a valid VAT clearance certificate, and a valid certificate of incorporation. All of this in addition to the payment of 100,000 as the application fee. Now, Vortex and Maripoma were not responsive in that particular respect. That is the submission of their documentation, and so they did not even progress to the stage of actual consideration. In
terms of submission of the documentation, are you familiar with the specific document they didn't submit?
Well, so they didn't submit. I think it was 3 out of them. 3 out of the documents I've mentioned. They didn't come in time. You know, all of this was...
It didn't come in time, or it didn't come at all?
It didn't come at all. When I say in time, basically, I mean, I didn't even come at all. So there was an allowable period for the documents to be submitted. So for the fact that they did not come, they were deemed, in the words of the committee, as unresponsive. And so for the fact that they were not responsive, the process continued without them. So now we had the battle lines drawn, if I have to put it that way, between Heath Goldfield and then the eventual winners, E&P.
But what about the timing? Because we've heard concerns that the time was limited, and that maybe also made it difficult for some of these companies, especially the tender period. We understand, is it 7 days, working days, that all of this was done? And we hear that ordinarily, it should be, we see this thing being done in 30 days. What clarification is there on this?
Well, so the allowable duration for a tender to last, based on the circumstances, is actually discretionary. All right, there is no stipulated law that binds anybody to a particular duration. Now, if you look at this particular issue, the circumstances around this particular issue, I've already indicated that on the 18th of April, there has to necessarily, in the interest of securing jobs and the operationalization of the mine, by all means, there has to be some level of continuity and there has to be some level of transitioning. So if you look at the time frame...
But we always knew this, didn't we?
Yes, we did. But if you look at the time frame, you didn't have that opportunity to maybe travel that long route of, let's say, 3 or maybe 6 months or whatever.
But we always knew that it was going to end on the 18th.
Exactly. Right? But you see, the companies who even came through, these are companies, 3 of them had earlier indicated their interest in that particular respect. So there was prior preparedness. So it wasn't something that was, as it were, dumped on them in the immediate, because then it would create the impression that they were not aware or they didn't have adequate time to put their documentation together, right? They had earlier, I can't give the duration, but I mean, way prior, they had expressed interest in it already. So it's a matter of, permit me to employ this analogy, it's a matter of, let's say, Zach going to tell Lady X that I'm interested in you.
You had to use a lady, didn't you?
No, I think it's more relatable. I mean, forgive me for that. So Zach goes to tell Lady A that, look, I'm interested in you in January. The lady says that, look, I'm in a relationship. Then 6 months later, I mean, Zach finds out that, look, now there is space, all right? So it means that the earlier interest of Zach only has to be activated. It doesn't have to generate any new affections for the lady in question. Indeed, if you were ready to marry her in January and you've not spent the savings in that regard, it's only a matter of going to withdraw.
Yeah, but you mentioned that there was a circumstance,
the ceremony.
The 7-day period was because of the circumstance that, this was going to happen on the 18th, and so we needed to deal with this as early as possible.
Absolutely.
And I was also asking that, of course, it's not a case of you only got to know about this in March. You always knew this. So this whole tender process, if you wanted to give it time and ensure that you give everybody the opportunity to go through the process as extensively as possible, you could have even started the tender process, say, in February, even at the start of the year.
Absolutely. That's a very fair concern. But the longevity of the tender process does not in any way suggest that you will come out with a qualitative outcome. Indeed, not to sound condescending, even if you were to open it for as long as 6 or maybe 10 months or even a year, it does not under any circumstance mean that you come out with the best outcome. What is important under the circumstances, first of all, are the guiding terms that you introduce to regulate the whole process, and then the expertise of the tender committee. And of course, I want to just say this on the side. Any, if you like, serious business, for the want of a better word, should at every given point have a standby, set of documentation vis-a-vis the valid tax clearance certificate. I mean, those are things that any, serious business would ordinarily
Let's come to the two
right. So
companies
the two that progressed away from the mandatory requirements.
And we hear that eventually Heath Goldfields, if I got their name right, missed out because of some technical requirement. Can you clarify what that means?
Exactly. So now, after the stage of the mandatory requirements, the next was the technical assessment. The committee needed to weigh the technical proficiency of the firms involved.
Well, what does that mean?
Your ability to deliver in terms of your human personnel, your capacity, and your experience in the related operation, right? We needed to, the committee, I should say, needed to explore that. I mean, how familiar are you with the turf that you are venturing into? Because it's not just about having the interest or having a vision for the mine. You also needed to prove demonstrably that, look, if this were to be given to me, I can go ahead and then operationalize it effectively. Now, over there, I mentioned that technical expertise and personnel and experience were relevant. So the committee basically did a scored assessment, right? And the threshold, I mean, as indicated even in the notice, is that any firm that would progress from there needed to score past the 80, all right? Because that was the threshold that was set. You needed to score above 80. I have to say, I could maybe at another forum, I'll give you the specific scoring, I mean, by the committee for, I mean, E&P and then Heath Goldfield. But after we exhausted that process, it was very apparent that Heath didn't cross to the 80. And so naturally, they were also disqualified. Now, it is after the technical assessments that you move to the very final stage, which is the financial evaluation. All right. Now, you have proven that technically you can mastermind the responsibility if the mine were to be given to you. But we also now will be thinking about what is in your pocket or your ability to mobilize funds. And that is where only E&P were standing isolated.
But specifically, though, are you able to share with us the technical deficiency that Heath Goldfields had, for which reason they didn't score high?
Well, so it basically had to do with, like I said, your capacity, right? Now,
because we know they are handling a mine.
Yeah, they are handling a mine, of course. Yeah. Yes, they are operational. But for this particular mine, first of all, the value of the mine and continuity, I mean, are all very crucial, right? Continuity in the sense that in demonstrating your technical prowess, you needed to be able to show demonstrably and immediately that, look, you can run the mine beyond a 10-year, if like, development plan. Okay, so that aspect is a bit technical, but the expertise, I mean, were brought to bear, and it became apparent that, look.
So eventually, E&P
they could not score. So yes, E&P now came to the
How long are they going to have this lease?
Okay, so in our laws, when a lease is issued, I want to believe, forgive me if I'm wrong on this, but I think it's the allowable duration now. It has always been 30, but there has been a revision to bring it to, I think, 15. So I'm sure would apply in this particular circumstance. But it is renewable anyway. In
terms of the share that government is going to get from this agreement, are you able to share with us?
So all of those would come up later. So now, the Minerals Commission has recommended, or the technical committee has recommended subsequently that the appropriate processes be continued. Of course, it would go to Parliament, and it would even come finally to the minister and all of that. So I'm sure those details will be exhausted. But I wanted to touch on a very important point about the financial capacitation of EMP in that particular respect. So the committee set a financial threshold of 500 to 600 million US dollars as the figure or the range for any firm to prove to be able to mobilize in order to be given the lease in question. Now, EMP exceeded, so the lower limit was 500, the upper, of course, 600 million US dollars. EMP demonstrated $505 million in the sense that they demonstrated that they had the capacity to mobilize those funds, of course, through ABSA and Stanbic. So the documentation bore them out that they had what it took to, finance the project. And that was basically the very last of the processes. So for the fact that they had satisfied, first of all, the mandatory requirements, the technical expertise, and then in terms of monetary value and financing, they had also demonstrated that, look, they had what it took. It became apparent that they had to be given the...
So you explained that eventually the agreement is going to go to Parliament, and that's where we're going to know the share government is going to be having in this mine. Is there a figure that is floating at the ministry at the moment that's been considered?
No, there's nothing of that sort at the moment.
But
so for now, a lease agreement would properly now be drafted for that purpose. Now,
do you know how much what our share was?
Aboso, I think Aboso were having, I think they had 90%, right? Earlier, I mean, the previous owners, or they've not handed over. So let me say the outgoing owners, so to speak. I think they had 90% and 10% was for government. I want to believe that that same arrangement would prevail. I mean, pending any other adjustment, I want to believe that that same arrangement is most likely.
Well, you're going to have
prevail.
I mean, so government is, well, I mean, for a research agenda, I don't think you should hold on to a 10% share.
That's why I'm saying that these matters are embedded in law, and they are all at every given point subject to change. And so when we get there, of course, and the concern you've raised that, look, if there is the need to make any relevant tweakings to it, it would be that. But we'll definitely...
Let's deal with the optics of it. The optics of it. And the concerns about conflict of interest. It's the president's brother who is getting this. And we've had some members of the opposition communicators raise legitimate concerns about conflict of interest. The minister is appointed by the president, or the individuals who got to be part of the tender committee, at least a chunk of them are appointed by the president, and the president's brother is expressing interest in a thing. What is the likelihood that they will not seek to please the president?
Well, I want to first of all say that these concerns are germane, especially against the backdrop that we have had in previous years, where there have equally been concerns about how those who mattered in their configuration of government, brought close associates to, as it were, handle certain affairs in a way that the Ghanaian people were not happy about. And so when these concerns emerge again, first of all, we want to say that they are valid and they are not issues that can be dismissed at all. But beyond what looks like the suspicion or the fear from the general populace, we now have to look at the merit of those concerns in the very first place. In this particular sense, yes, it is true that the firm that has been awarded the lease, or that would eventually be given the lease, ENP is owned by the president's brother, right? That is incontrovertibly true. But a more important conversation that ought to be had is whether or not ENP has the demonstrable capacity to take over the mine or not. Because if you dwell, forgive my use of the word, but if you dwell excessively on the familial ties between the owner of the firm and the president, perhaps at the end of the day, you may be doing a great disservice to not only the life of the mine, but indeed maybe even the employees of the company and the whole space in question, because you are looking for sustainability. You are looking for who has what it takes to run the mine, for the period that is allowed, and invest properly in a way that would, at the end of the day, benefits the economy. So the optics, yes, I'm saying fairly. You want to say, well, the president's brother, people on the committee were appointed, so there's a tendency for them to pander in a particular direction on all of that. But like I've earlier intimated and explained, there was, first of all, the state of the mandatory requirements. You come to technical assessment and then monetary evaluation. All of these facts that we have put out, and I could share the full report with you. If you were to study it independently, dispassionately, you realize that indeed E&P has the metal. And there's also a very important question, issue that I want to bring to bear.
Yeah, just briefly.
If it had been the case that E&P's coming into the fray, coincided with the election of His Excellency John Dramani Mahama as president, then perhaps maybe these suspicions would have been more rife in that particular respect. But as way back as 2022, E&P had expressed interest already, right? And they were the contractors on the mine anyway. They had expressed interest. The then Sector Minister for Lands and Natural Resources had, for the want of a better word, recommended that if there were the need for a transfer of the ownership, E&P could have undertaken the tax already. So it is not something that is coming
except if you're referring to the specific statement from the Ministry of Lands at the time.
Yeah.
They gave approval for E&P to engage the mining company for a potential takeover and not a definitive approval or recommendation that it should take over.
Absolutely. But that kind of recommendation is based on merits. If the two of us were to have applied around that time, while I was working with you back then as journalists, if we were to have applied back then, I don't think the minister would have even
fair enough. So when should we expect
it was a matter of
the whole agreement to go to Parliament? 18th is beckoning.
Yeah, 18th is truly beckoning.
So when should we expect the agreement?
Today is the 8th, I want to believe. So the minister has directed that the processes be fast-tracked because of basically the short timeline that we have. I want to believe that between now and a week, from this particular moment, the necessary protocols with respect to the parliamentary approval would have been initiated. Then all the other courtesies would be extended, and I'm sure would have a ceremony to, if you like, outdoor it in that particular regard.
Well, we do like ceremonies in this country, so we'll see how it works out. Schandorf, thank you very much for coming through.
Pleasure.
And I definitely will keep in touch and get more updates on this very development.